Anita Bose ji, welcome to Z News. Ahead of Netaji's 125th birth anniversary, PM Modi announced a grand statue of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose will be installed at the India Gate. I read that you called it, and I quote, a better late than never decision. I would definitely like to know more about your thoughts on this decision. Are you surprised? And it is also being said till the statue is completed, a hologram statue will be present. How do you see that?
Well, I was quite pleasantly surprised to hear about the fact that a statue of my father should be set up in such a prominent and prestigious place. What was a bit surprising is that it was announced rather suddenly, very shortly before the actual birth anniversary. But it certainly would be a very appropriate place for an Indian leader of my father's eminence. So I think this will maybe be a late slight to the British that now that he should take the place of George V in a location so close to the Parliament building and to Raj Bhavan. So that is certainly a very appropriate step. Of course, Delhi has always been the goal of the struggle, at least for the INA, the Delhi Cholo. So I'm glad that another hopefully nice statue will be added in Delhi, because after all there are some other statues of Netaji in Delhi and of course in many other towns and villages. And I must say what touches me the most, even though they are not the prettiest, that in many of the small villages, on the basis of the efforts of simple people, statues of Netaji have been set up, very often rather simple ones. But I think the emotion that is behind them is very touching.
Step that has been taken by the Indian government. Are you pleasantly surprised? And I would also like to know, why did you call it a better late than never decision?
Well, that's I could answer that in a twofold manner. One is, of course, that there has been talk about honoring Netaji through some memorial for a long time, and this might be one part of a memorial. Although I think, of course, the more important would be, say, something like an educational institution or institution sort of carrying across Netaji's ideas and ideals. But I think a statue also has an appeal, of course, to people who see it. And the other thing which why I said it was better late than never was because it came all of a sudden last year. A big opening ceremony was held in Kolkata for the beginning of the anniversary year, and plans were sort of outlined, or not even outlined yet. There was talk about a series of events to honor Netaji, and a big committee was set up, and I jokingly call it the non-existing committee because I'm a member of that, but it has never met, and at least as far as I know, it has never done anything, and so it was kind of surprising that at the end of the year the decision was made by the Prime Minister and his advisors, most likely, to set up the statue of Netaji. And evidently the statue could not be made that quickly. And I understand that he will sort of unveil, if one can unveil a hologram tomorrow. And sort of ceremonially inaugurate the monument, so to say.
Would you like to tell us more about the committee that you mentioned that never met? Did you try to reach out to the people responsible for that, and why do you think the meetings weren't called? What could be the reason?
Well,
Were you told
the reason,
anything?
of course, might be the present situation that with a number of things happening, Corona just being one of them. Of course, the people who are still active are busy and have more pressing tasks than organizing a series of events. But you might also surmise that the opening ceremony had a certain connection with the upcoming elections last year. And if you look at the venue, then you might say Bengal was considered a potentially important battleground. And Netaji, being one of the favorite sons of Bengal, was of course a figure to rally people around. And once the elections were over, somehow the issue of the birth anniversary became less important. But I really don't know. Maybe the committee was also too big to ever get to work, because I think there were about 60 or 80 members of the committee, and that certainly is a size where you have to sort of organize very well if they should do, or many of them should do something. But what also sort of came to mind is this, as you are aware, Bengal offered to make contribute a sort of float for the Republic Day parade on the 26th in Delhi, which was to include Netaji and other Bengali freedom fighters. And the central government turned it down. When I heard about this, I was kind of puzzled, baffled by the way why that would happen. And then I thought, well, maybe they had planned something else.
Anita Ji. That was precisely my next question, because there has been a controversy around the rejection of the tableau, which was to be themed on Netaji and his Indian National Army. CM Banerjee, Mamata Banerjee has said that it hurts the dignity of this state, and she's kind of shocked. How do you see this? What's your take on this?
Well, I'm not shocked, I would say, but I'm somewhat surprised. Because if the central government had forgotten all about it and not planned anything along those lines, they could have easily accepted the tableau. Even if they had planned a tableau of their own, they could have still accepted it and had two tableaus. And I think in having since the Republic Day is so close after the actual birth anniversary of my father, it was quite logical to have something in that connection during the Republic Day functions, and the parade, of course, would be one thing. And there would have been no harm in having two tableaus, I imagine. And I find it a bit ridiculous to have a fight about and a competition about honoring him. Either why not get together, or at least accept other people's, other institutions' activities that way. It's my opinion, if you cannot cooperate in such an effort, then okay, then compete. But in a way, the reaction was a bit ridiculous.
So according to you, what would be a satisfactory manner to put an end to the controversy with regards to the tableau?
Well, either accept the Bengali tableau or have two tableaus and get it done. But I heard somewhere that the chief minister wanted to, in case the tableau was not accepted, wanted to include the tableau, the Bengali tableau, in the Kolkata parade. But still, I think having both tableaus might be the best thing. If the central government tableau existed at all, or maybe it was just sort of invented at the last minute because the Bengalis had offered the tableau. Yeah, these are all sort of ceremonial matters. What I find far more important is that Netaji's ideas and ideals should continue to be upheld in India. Of course, they weren't always upheld, one has to say. And I always mention 2 or 3 aspects which trouble me the most. One is the communal rivalries and disputes, which take a very militant fashion very often even. And that certainly was not in Netaji's spirit at all, even though he was a devout Hindu. He was not a Hindu who sort of would go about attacking other people for their other religion, or would go and kill somebody because he was a member of another religion. And I think India has a very sad tradition, starting from the partition to the wars with Pakistan, to many violent incidents. If you remember the assassination of Indira Gandhi and the after effects when people would attack Sikhs who had nothing to do with the assassination at all, and kill them, and neighbors would go after neighbors. And that certainly is not in the spirit of Netaji. I mean, the INA was formed along totally different lines. And the
who would you blame
second
it for?
one, which the second one which grieves me very much is, of course, as a woman, which maybe you can commiserate with me, the fact that India has a very poor record on the treatment of women. First, I mean, gender equality is a problem throughout the world. Take any country, and except maybe the Scandinavian countries, it's not really realized anywhere. But India, of course, has the very sad reputation of being a very violent country with regard to that. And even today, women are exposed to more violence in India than in any other country. At least that's the reputation, and that's something one need not pride oneself. I think claiming to be the largest democracy is certainly a more positive aspect, and I think Netaji would have been happy about that.
Anita ji, you have always maintained that Netaji's legacy continues to be exploited for political gains. The points that you made so far, do you think it still continues to be the same, or do you see a change?
It always will be, because that's in the nature of politics and politicians, that they have to seek and grab opportunities to come across with the electorate. And maybe you might say in a democracy it's more so than in a totalitarian system, where leaders don't really bother too much about what the population thinks and what they do. But I mean, if you have to win elections, you have to reach across to the electorate, and of course, using events connected with a charismatic leader certainly are opportunities that you would not want to forego as a politician. And I don't blame any politician for doing that. I mean, I'm a politician in a very minor way, but I'm also aware of that fact, that you have to be seen and you have to be heard. And if you have a reason sort of to reach across others, you will do it. And in essence, there's nothing wrong in that. I think what I do not like very much if his personality, his image is sort of hijacked for purposes which certainly do not coincide with his with the values that he has espoused. And I mean, and this is not without criticism. Don't get me wrong in that sense. It's not that I feel that my father was a person who was totally without any reason to criticize this or that. Anyone will have to do things which are not always maybe what he would like to do or what others would like him to do. So he is criticized, for example, for having sided with fascist Germany and fascist Japan. But tell me, historically speaking, was there an alternative? There were no countries that would support any other country against Britain. But these three, Germany, Italy, and Japan, and they certainly were regimes with a very undesirable ideology. And you might say it was sort of a pact with the devil that he had to undergo. But the alternative might have been to sit in jail in India and do nothing. And he certainly would never have condoned doing what some of the other Indian leaders did, sort of half-heartedly suggesting a collaboration with Britain. And so you might find fault with some things, but I think the positive aspects of a leader that outweigh that, of course, would be a way to reach the public. And if you look at the great affection that Netaji still commands amongst his countrymen and countrywomen, this is quite amazing. And how could a politician forego trying to exploit that?
So what do you think could be the reason or reasons for previous governments not to celebrate Netaji's life or his contribution as a nationalist? Do you think he was deliberately denied what should have been his for a very long time?
I think in many ways he was celebrated, but maybe in a more modest way. And it was also, I mean, look alone at the situation that this is a man who was born 125 years ago. He died 77 years ago, or almost 77 years ago. He has not been around and not been seen in India since then. He had no impact in terms of his own activities during the time India was independent. And yet he commands a charisma and in a way, he's an icon. He's an iconic leader and touches people very deeply. He did that too when he was alive. I've talked to some people who said, I've never met him personally, but I've seen him at a distance and it made a difference in my life. And how many people are there of whom you can say that? So I think Netaji touched many people in many ways. And it's true that some of the politicians who were not only his comrades in the freedom struggle, but also to some extent his competitors, sort of tended to downplay his contribution and uplift their own. But I think it evidently could not deter the general public of India sufficiently to forget him.
Would you like to name those politicians who did injustice to your father and his legacy?
In the early years after independence, when many of the documents were not yet declassified, which showed the process of India's becoming independent. I think there was a section of the Congress leadership which sort of tried to downplay his contribution to the independence struggle and sort of claim it was only the struggle for independence which led to independence. And of course, once the documents became declassified, it became quite evident that it was, to a large extent, also the publicity about the INA activities, which led to the disaffection of the Navy and the Army, and that the British could no longer depend on the British Indian Army to uphold their control of India. And therefore, it's not surprising that the British hated Netaji very much.
How do you react to the historic facts that your father was not promoted? You said a section in the Congress party. So how would you react to the historic facts that your father wasn't promoted in the Congress party by Gandhiji simply because he preferred Nehru over him?
And I don't think it's only a question of preferring Nehru over him. I mean, there may be may have been a difference of views and opinions on some matters, but I think it was also a matter of, I mean, Gandhi had a large degree of control over Congress, but ultimately he could not control my father. He had his own views, his own ideas, and Nehru, even though Nehru and my father had very similar ideas in some aspects, they were both leftist leaders in Congress. They were both relatively modern at the time, but ultimately, when it came to a decision, the general view was that Nehru could be brought around to do what Gandhi wanted to do. But Netaji could not necessarily be brought around if he was convinced that he was right. And so that certainly would be one aspect why Gandhi would have sort of preferred Nehru over my father. I mean, my father was the rebellious son, and Pandit Nehru, if you want to say so, was the more obedient son. But I think that ultimately was not so important. I mean, my father was no longer around to suffer from this, if you want to say, lack of regard. But what really distresses me very much is that the INA veterans were not treated very well. I think, if anything, the INA suffered maybe the most or certainly were freedom fighters who suffered very, very much. And it took a long time till they were even recognized as freedom fighters, till they got any benefits, and compared to other freedom fighters, or if you want to say the British Indian Army, they got a rough deal. And some of them were not just sort of managing, I mean, some did, but there were many who were really in utter poverty. And that, I think, is certainly something which distresses me a lot. And I know it also distresses many of Netaji's closer associates and friends.
You also mentioned Netaji meeting Hitler. What would you like to share with our viewers with regards to that? The things that you heard from your mother or others?
It was a very difficult relationship. First of all, My father was not at all friendly disposed towards the Nazi regime. But since the Soviet Union turned down in 1941 to help India and just allowed him to pass through the Soviet Union on his way to Germany, it was one country which, from their own interest point of view, was opposing the British at the time. But Germany was a racist country, much more than it is now, and the Indians were not considered their equals. I mean, they were dark-skinned and therefore of an inferior race. If the concept of race makes any sense at all, which biologically it doesn't. And so the German government, in part at least, and particularly in the top leadership, meaning Hitler, was sort of very half-hearted about supporting India. As long as they saw a potential interest to themselves, they did to some extent. But once the fortunes of war had changed, India became less interesting for them, and the only thing that they were willing to do is to help him, which was not that easy at the time either, to get to the Far East in order to join the freedom movement there. And it was not so easy because a war was ongoing, and they sent him by submarine around Africa, which was a dangerous journey, was a long journey, was technologically a difficult journey at the time. Yeah. So, and it took a long time till he managed to get an appointment to see Hitler. And ultimately that meeting was not very satisfactory. I mean, in India, some people see that in a different manner. They feel that Hitler was a friend of India, which I would say, was not. And he was a very evil and ill-advised individual with absolutely insane ideas. And as far as world politics is concerned, one can only be happy that he lost, or his country lost the war. But I mean, Hitler supported him insofar as I mentioned that he gave him the opportunity to get to the Far East, and that was certainly also an adventurous and dangerous undertaking.
Yes.
But ultimately, Netaji was forced to get the support of people whose values he certainly did not share, and he was quite upset about things, even though he too may not have known what all had been going on during the Second World War in terms of the treatment of Jews, of Sinti and Roma, and disabled people and all sorts of things. I mean, this regime was pretty horrible.
Are you aware of the fact whether Netaji ever met Mussolini from Italy as well?
Oh yeah,
he met Mussolini. But did he ever meet?
Yeah, he met Mussolini, I think 2 or 3 times, quite early, already in 1935, when he returned from India to Europe after his father died. He had just published his book, The Indian Struggle, and he got an opportunity to meet Mussolini and gave him a copy of his book. And then he saw him again, I think in 1941, when the Germans were sort of dilly-dallying around. He went to Italy and I think during that period he met Mussolini also. The Italians were more friendly disposed towards India's interest, but they didn't do anything against or without the Germans' consent. And that's why ultimately the Italians couldn't help the Indian independence struggle all that much either, because there was an ongoing argument about the so-called India resolution, which my father wanted to have signed by Germany and by Japan and by Italy, meaning a resolution committing themselves to India's independence after the end of the war. And Hitler didn't care for that. In a way, he took the position that Indians were much better off under the rule of the white man, Britain, than without, and things like that. And Mussolini also did not want to go ahead and sign this resolution without the German support, because Italy was to some extent also dependent on Germany. So even though basically there was a more friendly attitude, it didn't bring across an awful lot of action in that respect either.
Okay. So how are your relations now with other members of Netaji's family? Is it all sorted now, like a big happy family, or are there still differences?
Oh, with some I have very good relations. Others I see off and on, not too often. And we have a very large family. So in my generation, just my father's sisters and brothers' children, we would have been, if everyone had been alive, 56. So you can imagine, and by now most of them are dead and gone. I'm one of the youngest, and so there are not too many of my generation left in the Bose family. And I have had very close relations to some of them, and more distant ones to others. And as in some families, in other large families, you have some who are close. For example, my father and his brother Sharon were unusually close. And and then of course, there are a couple of them whom I've never met.
My last question to you is, would you like to share more about Netaji's alleged disappearance, or what sort of fate he met? Because the real truth never came out. What happened, why it happened?
I can tell you my opinion, and that is quite clear. I'm convinced that he died as a consequence of the plane crash in what is now Taipei, in Taiwan, on the 18th of August 1945. There is fairly good evidence of that. It's not watertight, but you can't expect that under the circumstances. You have to consider he died on the 18th of August. Around the 15th, Japan capitulated. On the 6th of August, the first nuclear bomb was thrown on Hiroshima, and a couple of days after that on Nagasaki. The Tenno, the Japanese emperor, spoke to his people for the first time on, I think it was on the 15th of August, on radio, which was an unheard of thing, announcing the capitulation. And this was a traumatic situation in Japan. The Japanese were starting to get out of some of the areas like what is now Taiwan, which they had occupied for a number of years. And so everything was in upheaval at the time. And at a time like that, you don't sort of pay attention to documenting everything and providing evidence for the future. You just have other things to worry about. And so I think some people make a big issue about minor discrepancies, but if you look at all the alternative stories, the events around that are reasonably well documented. For one thing, there were a number of eyewitnesses. Of course, most of them have passed away all of them. And so this is a rather well-documented story. Of course, many of these things were kept under, were considered confidential documents and were not published for a long time. That's why some of the facts only came out later on. But the British, the Americans, and others had sort of investigated this right away. I mean, the British were most keen to know whether he really was killed because it was not unimportant for them. And so all the other stories are sort of a conglomerate of hearsay things, and I mean stuff like this Gumnami Baba thing. They're crazy, and besides that, they are an insult to Netaji.
Okay, Anita ji, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation and your insights and into Netaji's life and what sort of India he envisioned and what sort of India he wanted to see. Thank you so much, Anita ji.
Nice talking to you.
Presenting B News app, available on Google Play and App Store. Download it now.